Hola amigos de órbita, estamos aquí en Cartagena y porque la ley de Murphy es la ley, pues tengo gripa, pero igual seguimos haciendo entrevistas para traerles a ustedes a personajes relevantes de la cultura, esta vez jóvenes talentos británicos que vinieron gracias al British Council aquí al Hay Festival para comunicarse con los jóvenes escritores y con los viejos también. Estamos aquí con David Szalay, que nos está acompañando. David, welcome to In Orbita. Thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you.
How do you like it here in Cartagena?
I like it very much. I mean, we've been here a few days and it's been beautiful, lovely.
Have you been, is this your first time in South America?
It is. My first time in South America, the Caribbean, this whole region. So it's a great pleasure to be here.
Okay. Do you consider yourself a Canadian or British?
British, really. But it's a slightly complicated picture because I was born in Canada and my mother is Canadian. My father is Hungarian as well. So yeah, but
Your
British.
father is Hungarian?
He was born in Hungary.
Okay.
And he moved to Canada and I was born in Canada. And then shortly after that we moved to Britain. So
It's quite a mixture.
yeah, definitely.
Is it a good mixture? Has it worked for you?
I've had to make it work. It's yeah, it has. Obviously, it's. I feel British. I've grown up and spent my whole life in London, but there's always a slight sense of detachment from the. Maybe detachment is too strong a word, but there is a tiny gap between my identity and just being straightforwardly British, which is interesting. Yeah.
Okay, but were you raised as a British or were you raised Hungarianly or Canadianly?
I was raised Britishly. Well, it's not, I mean, I don't know. I sound British. I behave, I mean, most people on meeting me would think not only was I British, but I was perhaps very British. Maybe that's somehow to compensate for the fact that I'm not really entirely British. I think the school system is what molds you. Well, actually, everybody, more than your parents. If you're living in a country and going to school in that country, the people that you go to school with form your identity. As it happens at home, I mean, my father didn't speak Hungarian to us at home, so we spoke English at home. My mother's father is British, so in fact we had some British family as well. So, but yeah, we could talk about it all day. But
I know, we'll never get it resolved. Let's talk about your creative process. How do you begin to write?
How?
How did you begin? How did you begin writing, and how do you begin?
Right.
A novel?
I mean, I started writing when I was very young. I mean, just for fun, to amuse myself when I was still at school. And that would have been because I loved reading, I guess, and I was just wanting to imitate the books that I loved reading so much.
What kinds of books do you like?
It's lots. I read a lot when I was a child. Most of the books I can't remember. I can remember a couple of books, probably just because they're very famous books, so they stick in my mind. The Hobbit is an example of a very famous book that I read and loved as a child. But there will have been hundreds of other books that I have no memory of. And then I wrote at school and a student at university. So that's how I sort of formed that's how I started to write and formed a sort of I don't know about an identity as a writer, but even at that stage I had an ambition to be a writer. Then I didn't really write much in my 20s after leaving university, and I came back to writing. I did other things, other jobs, and I came back to writing because a friend of mine worked at the BBC in the radio drama department and suggested that I write a play for the radio. So I did that, and that was quite successful, so I wrote a few more, and then that gave me the confidence and also the appetite to start writing a novel, because I was enjoying the writing again, and so then I started writing my first novel, London and the Southeast.
Mm-hmm. So how did you begin to write? How did you begin to write London and the Southeast?
Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, that novel is about telephone salesman in London, which was a job that I had done during the sort of years when I wasn't writing, and it was a job that I had strong feelings about, mostly negative feelings, and it was a subject I was drawn to write about because I enjoyed writing about it. really enjoyed writing about the awfulness of it, and you know, it's a kind of black comedy, I think, that novel, and of course I made it probably more horrible than it really is, but that was part of the pleasure of it. It was a almost kind of cathartic process writing that book. So it was quite easy to start writing it. I did do one thing when I was writing it, in the process of writing, which was I would write it one chapter at a time, and after I'd finished each chapter, I told myself that I wouldn't look at that chapter again until the whole book was finished. And that was quite useful because it meant that I had to keep moving forward. I couldn't sort of dwell on what I'd already written, which is, I think, what a lot of writers who are beginning their careers are tempted to just spend most of their time trying to make what they've already written perfect. Whereas it's more important just to finish a draft of the whole book and then see what you've got.
You're writing about an awful job. Do you believe in inspiration? Was it inspiring in a way?
The job? Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, you can look at the situation like that. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the job and the hatred of the job, but also the kind of, I was so familiar with that world and with the nature of that world, and it's quite a fascinating world in a way. It's quite a grotesque world. It's a sort of harsh world because it's commission-only telephone sales, so you don't get any money unless you sell something. So you can imagine how stressful that could be and how aggressive it can become. And so yeah, it was an interesting world to write about.
Have you felt that kind of pressure as a writer? You have to sell a book?
Yeah, I mean, not in the same way, of course, but yes, there is that pressure kind of always looming over you, yeah, that you have to sell books, otherwise people are going to stop giving you money, yeah.
In many reviews that you can read about your book, London and the Southeast, they talk about the real life. Is there such thing as a real life? Do you like to talk about what you consider real life?
Well, there's real life is whatever seems real subjectively to people. So I mean, I like to write about. I mean, I like to write novels which are about what I consider real life. There aren't really very many novels set in workplaces which focus on sort of offices and that part of life. But that's, of course, one of the major components of most people's lives. So it's something which I felt was worth writing about. More broadly, yeah, I mean, I do like to write about. It's difficult to know how to put it, but I don't like to write anything sort of which is fantasy. I like to write about the world that I know. Nothing interests me more than the world that I know, than the sort of texture of that world, I don't know, just capturing that world is what interests me most as a writer.
David, just to wrap up the interview, sure. Give the beginners, the new writers, some advice from your own experience.
Well, choose a subject which is somehow emotionally compelling to you, I'd say. My own experience of writing about the sales job that we've been discussing, I think the reason why I was able to successfully finish a book about that is because I found it so emotionally compelling. It was quite a negative emotions mainly that were associated with it, but they were very strong. And I think you need to have that sort of emotional attachment to the subject to get through the inevitable difficulties of finishing a novel.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Hope. Nosotros seguimos a la casa de personajes interesantes aquí en Cartagena, pues ya que nos mandaron, pues hay que literalmente sudar el sueldo y nosotros nos vamos, pero recuerden que pueden ver esta entrevista completa en www.enorbita.tv. Hasta luego.